Hi, my name is Deborah. I'm 38 years old, and for several years now I've been running my own antiques business, which, to my surprise and perhaps pride, has become quite successful, although, to be honest, things weren't always so smooth. I started it with my ex-husband, and back then, the two of us, enthusiastically and with almost no money, were trying to build some kind of footing, trudging to garage sales, haggling over antique lamps and boxes, dreaming of one day opening our own small but cozy shop. Many years have passed, and now, looking back, I realize that it was probably then that the tenacity that saved me later began to emerge, when our marriage fell apart, leaving behind not only exhaustion but also the need to split everything equally: the business, the property, even some of the clients. The divorce was a cold, drawn-out, and very expensive process, and when everything was finally signed and split evenly, I thought that with that signature, I'd also signed the end of everything I'd built. But, to my surprise, and perhaps to my ex-husband's annoyance, I didn't collapse. On the contrary, as if out of stubbornness, out of a pure desire to prove I could do it myself, I threw myself into work. These 3 years after the divorce turned out to be the hardest and, at the same time, the most productive of my life. I started rebuilding my sales system from scratch, went online, explored platforms I'd only heard of, started traveling to estate sales across 3 states, waking up at 4 a.m. to make it to auctions, returning late at night with a trunk full of things that had belonged to someone else that morning. I built a client base of true collectors, not random buyers, but those who have a feel for a thing, who understand the value of history. And now, all these years later, I was earning more than I could have ever imagined when my husband and I first started. But with this success came something else, a feeling that everyone expected something from you, as if your success had become not yours but a shared family treasure. My family had become accustomed to thinking of me as the family ATM. My parents, my younger brother Jacob, my sister Clara, they all seemed to be integrated into my financial system. Every month, I dutifully paid my parents' mortgage, the house where I grew up, which cost me $2,800 a month. It seemed like a source of pride, but sometimes I felt less like a daughter and more like a sponsor. Added to this were the medical bills. As I aged, my father's diabetes worsened, and my mother increasingly complained of arthritis. Their insurance covered only a pittance, leaving the rest on me. I paid without arguing, but with each new bill, something inside me seemed to tire, compressing like a spring. And then there was Jacob, my younger brother, always convinced that life owed him something. A couple of years ago, he bought a huge, shiny truck, though even I, with my income, would have thought twice about such luxury. Of course, 6 months later, it turned out he couldn't afford it, and guess who picked up the $650 a month? Yes, me, as always. And finally, Clara, the youngest, fragile, charming, with a ton of ideas and a perpetual feeling that it hasn't worked out yet, but it definitely will. She rented an apartment downtown, nice but expensive, $1,900 a month. She worked for a marketing firm, but, as it turned out, she didn't earn enough to pay for her own place. And then there was me. I paid for her, and, it seems, so I wouldn't feel guilty if I didn't help out one day. All told, I spent over $5,000 a month just to support my family. I told myself that was how it should be. After all, I had money and they didn't, and isn't that what family is all about? But sometimes, late at night, as I sat in the store among the antique mirrors and porcelain figurines, I caught myself wondering if perhaps this help wasn't an act of love, but a habit no one wants to break. One day, on a typical Tuesday, I was sorting through papers in the store's office, checking reports and invoices, when a notification for a new email popped up on my computer screen. From my mom. Subject: Anniversary gift ideas. I smiled, thinking it was probably about suggestions for dinner or maybe some kind of family get-together. I opened the email, unaware that it would be a small revelation. But instead of the usual holiday platitudes, I saw a carefully compiled list, not just a list, but like a document with subheadings. At the top was the heading Gifts from Jacob and Clara, and beneath it, innocuous-looking items: a kitchen set, a coffee maker, a microwave, a few throw pillows. I grinned. It looked cute, practical, and nothing out of place. However, just below that was a second section, labeled Special Gifts, with my name in parentheses. There were exactly 3 items on the list: and if anyone had seen my face at the time, they probably would have realized I didn't immediately realize what I was reading. The first item was a trip to the Maldives for two, costing $15,000. The second was a new car, the make unspecified, but I knew perfectly well that Dad had been eyeing a sedan for a while, one that would definitely cost at least $30,000. And finally, the third item was diamond earrings. I reread the letter 3 times because I couldn't believe I'd understood everything correctly. My parents seriously wanted me to pay for a luxury vacation, a new car, and jewelry, while my brother and sister were stuck with a coffee maker and pillows. I sat there, feeling my head growing strangely light, as if the air around me had become thicker and the world had tilted slightly. I felt dizzy, nausea rising in my throat, and before the end of the workday, I called for my assistant, Linda. I'm leaving early, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, everything's fine, I'm just tired. And without explaining anything, I picked up my bag and left, as if in a fog, with that feeling when you seem to be moving but aren't quite sure where. The first thing I did when I got home was make myself some mint tea, a familiar ritual when I need to calm down. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the kettle quietly crackle, and tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, some kind of joke, some kind of bad humor, that Mom couldn't seriously have sent me such a list. When the cup cooled, I picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to sound gentle. "Deborah." Her voice was cheerful, even joyful. "Oh, I'm so glad you called. Did you get my letter? Dad and I are so happy, our anniversary is coming up." "Yes, Mom, that's exactly the letter I wanted to talk to you about," I began cautiously. "It's a gift list, I just wanted to check." "Oh, wonderful," she interrupted. "I was hoping you'd get in touch. Your dad and I are so excited. Can you imagine, 40 years together? It's hard to believe, Mom," I said, feeling my stomach tighten. "I can't buy such expensive gifts, a trip to the Maldives, a new car that's thousands of dollars." Her voice changed instantly, from soft to hard, almost prickly. "Deborah, you have a successful business, you earn more than all of us combined. These gifts are like going out to dinner for someone else, it won't affect your income." I took a deep breath. "Okay, I understand you want to celebrate in a special way. Let's choose one thing from the list. I'd be happy to buy it." A moment of silence, then, laughter, not kind, not joyful, but that condescending kind that makes your insides clench. "Oh, darling," she said, "you're being silly, those aren't options, we need all three." For a second, I couldn't even answer. "All three?" I asked, barely audible. "So you want the trip, the car, and the earrings?" "Of course," Mom said, as if she were stating something self-evident. "Your father and I discussed it with Jacob and Clara, and everyone agreed it was fair." "Fair?" I repeated, feeling a wave of indignation begin to rise within me. "Mom, do you even realize this is over $50,000? Deborah," her voice turned icy, "we gave you life, we raised you, we've always supported you, now it's your turn to take proper care of us." "Mom," I almost couldn't believe I was saying it. "I've been working since I was 16, I went to college on a scholarship. I built the business from scratch, all by myself, you didn't put a dime into it." "Don't you dare talk to me like that." Her voice rose to a scream. "You're an ungrateful, selfish, greedy woman. After everything we've done for you." I barely kept myself from raising my voice. "Mom, I pay your house and your medical bills every month, isn't that enough?" "It's the least you can do," she snapped, "and if you think you can do this to us, then don't come to the party, you're not invited." The line went dead, leaving a silence that made my head ring. I sat staring at the phone screen, as if it could explain what had just happened. It felt like the air in the room had grown heavier. An hour passed, maybe less. The phone buzzed again, one notification, two, three, the messages poured in one after another. "Deborah, what's wrong?" Jacob wrote, "Just buy them what they want, don't be petty." Then Clara, "Are you serious? Are you really going to ruin their anniversary? They raised us." Another message from Jacob, "You make a ton of money, what does it cost you?" And the last one from Clara, "It's just a way to show you love them, the least you can do is make their 40th birthday special." I put my phone down and opened my laptop, feeling a slow weariness creeping through my body, not the usual physical one, but a different, deeper kind, like the afterglow of an emotional hangover. A week ago, I'd already agreed to pay for their anniversary dinner, at an expensive restaurant downtown, where the menu starts with numbers that make ordinary people dizzy. I'd put down a $3,000 deposit for 30 guests, booked live music, discussed the menu, and even arranged with the florist for flowers my mother had loved since her youth, pink peonies and white lilies. Back then, I'd imagined this evening would be a joy for them, a gift from the heart, but after today's conversation, after being called greedy, selfish, and ungrateful, I felt I no longer had to be convenient. I picked up the phone and called the restaurant. The woman on the other end was polite and a little tired. "Hello, Elmwood Restaurant, speaking to you." "Good evening," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to cancel my reservation for the Morrisons' party." "Of course, ma'am," she replied after a short pause. "Our policy is to charge a 30% administrative fee for cancellations. Would you like us to refund the remaining balance to the same card?" "Yes," I said briefly, "thank you." When the call ended, I closed my laptop and sat for a minute, staring into the darkness of the room. My thoughts were swirling in my head, but they all boiled down to one thing. It was time to stop. It's time to stop being their lifeline, their bank account, their safety net. I opened my banking app and, feeling a strange calm, tapped the cancel button for my parents' mortgage payment, then for Jacob's truck payment, then for Clara's rent. Each tap felt like a small breath of freedom. I took screenshots of all the canceled transactions and sent them to our family group chat with a single message: "Since I'm so selfish and greedy, I guess you don't need my money anymore." Then I turned off my phone, turned it face down, and went to bed, feeling not anxiety but a strange, quiet relief for the first time in a long time. When I woke up in the morning, I instinctively reached for my phone, and saw that the screen was literally flooded with notifications, missed calls, dozens of messages, voicemails, new emails, all from family. The first was from my mother: "Deborah, what have you done? Call me immediately." Then from my father: "This is outrageous, you can't just abandon your family." Then Jacob: "Are you crazy? The truck payment is due tomorrow." Then Clara: "I'll be evicted if you don't transfer the rent. You can't just stop." Another message from Jacob: "You've confused us. We're your family." And the last one from Clara, short and full of accusations: "Mom is crying, Dad has chest pains, are you happy?" The messages kept coming even after I silenced my phone, as if someone were desperately knocking on my door from inside the screen, but to my surprise, I didn't feel guilty. On the contrary, for the first time in years, I felt calm. I made myself some coffee, toasted some toast, and sat at the table, relishing the fact that the morning belonged to me alone. I got dressed and drove to work as usual, enjoying the cool morning air and the quiet of the car. Everything seemed ordinary until around 10 o'clock, when I heard a loud, sharp knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I went to the window and looked out, and in that moment, all the air seemed to leave my lungs. There they stood on the porch: Mom, Dad, Jacob, and Clara, all together. Their faces were tense, pale, their eyes red, as if from a sleepless night. "Deborah." Mom's voice was loud, almost commanding. "Open up, we need to talk." "I don't want to talk to you," I replied, standing by the door and not moving. "Please, dear," my father intervened, his voice softer, "we can work this out." "There's nothing to work out," I said calmly. "You've made it clear how you feel about me." Clara suddenly screamed, almost crying, "Deborah, I can't pay the rent. The landlord's already threatening to evict me." "Then maybe I should find a better job," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. Jacob stepped forward, his face grim. "I need to pay for the truck. I'll lose it if you don't help." "You should have thought of this sooner," I replied, "before calling me greedy and selfish." Mom burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "Deborah, we're your parents. You can't just cut us out of your life. Look at me, please." I didn't answer. I just turned around and went upstairs, turned on the music, and tried to focus on my work emails. Over the hum of the music, I could still hear them knocking, my mother calling my name, Clara sobbing, and my father trying to calm them down. This went on for about an hour before the sounds faded. I went to the window and watched them slowly walk down the path, tired, confused, still not believing I'd actually said no. The next few days passed surprisingly calmly, as if after a long thunderstorm a quiet, slightly fragile, Yet so welcome clarity had finally settled in. I went to work as usual, opening the store early in the morning, when the first sunlight was just beginning to fall through the windows and the air still smelled of the night's chill. I talked to clients, helped them choose items, and told the stories of objects that had once belonged to people long gone but had left their mark on brass handles. Porcelain cups and mirrors cracked with time. I took inventory, looked through catalogs, and noted what needed updating or restoration, and for the first time in many years, when my phone was clear of alarming messages, requests, or hints of yet another urgent need, I felt not emptiness but a strange, quiet satisfaction. It was strange not to think every morning that maybe Mom had a new medication bill, Dad's glucometer was broken, Clara's paycheck was late, and Jacob's truck payment was suddenly due again. Strange, but strange in a good way. I woke up and knew, everything I earned today, everything I did, belonged only to me. That Friday, I was sitting in my office, sorting through old receipts and planning my shopping for the next week, when my assistant knocked quietly on the door. "Deborah," she said cautiously, "your parents are here, they want to talk to you." I exhaled, clutching my pen in my fingers. I really didn't want a repeat of the scene outside my house. I couldn't afford to put on a show in front of my customers. "Okay," I said after a short pause, "let them come into my office, but please close the door behind them." A minute later, Mom and Dad appeared in the doorway. They looked tired and haggard, as if they'd aged a few years in the last few days. Mom's eyes were red and puffy, she'd clearly been crying. "Can we sit down?" Dad asked, trying to speak evenly. "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chairs opposite my desk. "Just hurry up, please, I have a working day." Mom couldn't hold back the tears again and buried her face in her hands. Dad put his hand on her shoulder. "Deborah," he began, "we were wrong to demand such expensive gifts from you. We've discussed everything and decided that one is enough. Either a trip to the Maldives, or a new car, or diamond earrings, just choose one." I stared at them for a few seconds, motionless, then I suddenly burst out laughing, at first, quietly, almost soundlessly, and then I couldn't hold back. The laughter burst out of its own accord, loud, nervous, with tears in my eyes. It seemed to me that the situation was so absurd that laughter was the only way to keep from exploding. They exchanged wary glances, as if they didn't understand what was happening. "What's so funny?" Dad asked irritably. I wiped my eyes and, catching my breath a little, said, "You still don't understand, do you? I'm not buying you anything, not the trip, not the car, not the earrings, nothing." Mom clutched her chest dramatically, as if she were on stage. "You're breaking my heart, Deborah," she sobbed. "Mom," I replied calmly, "I've been paying your medical bills for years, I'm sure your heart is fine, and enough of this drama. I supported you, all of you, for years, and you took it for granted, that's over." Dad frowned and leaned forward. "What about the anniversary dinner?" he asked. "I cancelled it," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "The restaurant deposit is back, you can have your own celebration." Mom gasped, as if I'd announced I'd deprived them of their home. "You cancelled the dinner?" she whispered, "but we already invited 30 people. "Then you should start planning something you can actually afford," I replied evenly. "Deborah, please." Mom began, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "No," I said firmly, "I want you both to leave my office right now, and don't come to my work anymore." They stood up without saying a word. Mom was sobbing, Dad was holding her arm. After the door closed behind them, I could hear their footsteps receding down the hallway for a long time, and Mom's quiet crying, almost in a whisper, as if she were afraid I could still hear. For the next week and a half, my phone never stopped ringing. Everyone was calling, Aunt Sarah, Cousin Alberto, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each of them felt it their duty to remind me that I was wrong. "Deborah, your mother cries day and night," Sarah said. "That's cruel to your parents, they're elderly." "Deborah," Alberto admonished, "you have to show compassion, they raised you, after all." "All that money comes from your business," another cousin added. "Is it really that hard for you to share?" I hung up without listening to the rest. I could no longer bear even a shadow of anyone else's opinion about how I managed my life and my money, and the further I distanced myself from their endless complaints, the more I felt I was finally beginning to breathe freely. 2 weeks later, That very day arrived, their 40th wedding anniversary, the date they'd been harping on for months as if it were a momentous occasion comparable to a national holiday. That day passed unusually calmly for me, without calls, without messages, without reproaches, and, surprisingly, I felt good precisely because of this: the silence, the absence of emotional blackmail, the fact that my phone wasn't shaking on the table, reminding me of my duty to my family. I drank coffee on the veranda, worked a little on a new project for the store, and even allowed myself a long walk along the embankment in the evening. It wasn't until the next day, when the morning was lazy and a slight autumn chill hung in the air, that I suddenly became curious, not out of concern, no, just out of human interest. I opened my laptop and logged onto social media to catch a glimpse of how their big day had gone. When I visited Clara's Facebook page, I immediately saw a new album. The title said it all: a modest celebration of Mom and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary. I scrolled through the photos and was overcome with a feeling of irony, mild surprise, and even a certain sad tenderness. The pictures showed a small group, no more than 10 people, my parents' spacious living room, painfully familiar, the same faded carpet, the old cabinet with a crack in the door, the lace tablecloth my mother embroidered herself when I was 10. On the table was food that was clearly homemade. Fried chicken, salads, a layer cake from the local grocery store. On the shelves were paper garlands and cheap balloons that looked like they'd been bought at a dollar store. Everything was simple, but cozy in its own way. And the caption underneath the album made me laugh out loud: sometimes you have to be content when ungrateful people forget what family means. I laughed until I cried, because it was so typical of Clara: dramatic, accusatory, and painfully predictable. Ungrateful people, that's obviously me. But honestly, the more I looked at the photos, the less angry I felt. Everyone in them looked quite content. Mom, in a bright pink blouse, smiled, holding a glass of cheap champagne. Dad sat nearby, his hand on her shoulder, and despite the tiredness in his eyes, there was something touching in the gesture. The relatives were laughing. Clara's children were spinning around the cake. It looked truly family-like. Maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to be, without the glitz, without my checks and bank transfers, just their evening, their celebration, organized and paid for by them. 2 months passed after that anniversary, and I caught myself thinking I couldn't remember the last time I felt such inner lightness. No endless pleading calls, no emergency payments, no late-night messages asking to borrow something until Friday. During this time, I was able to focus on what really matters: myself and my business. My antiques business took off. I closed 3 major deals, among which the most successful was the sale of an antique Victorian dining set to a California collector for $18,000. Every time I looked at my income statement, I couldn't help but think about how much money I used to simply hand over, without a second thought, into the ever-demanding hands of strangers. The $5,000 a month that used to go to paying other people's bills was now mine, and it was growing, transforming from extra into the foundation of my independence. That Thursday evening, returning home after a busy day, I was already looking forward to a hot bath and a glass of wine when I noticed an old, familiar Honda at the gate, shabby, with rusty sills and a "We're Family" sticker on the rear window. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately recognized who it was: my parents. They were sitting in the car, and even from a distance, I could tell they were waiting for me. When I parked and got out, they both immediately got out and hurried to greet me. "Deborah, we need to talk," my father said, his voice sounding tired, his face looking a decade older. "What happened?" I asked coldly, not moving. Mom came closer, clutching her purse, as if searching for words. "We're in big trouble," she said, her voice shaking. "We can't pay the mortgage anymore. The bank sent a letter saying they're going to foreclose on the house." I stood there, listening to them, but inside I felt neither pity nor surprise, only a heavy, cold awareness of the predictability of what was happening. "Interesting," I said, leaning against the car, "because for the last few years, I've been paying your mortgage myself. You promised you'd save money so you could take over the payments later." Dad looked down, shaking his head slowly. "We didn't save that much," he muttered. "Not much?" I repeated. $2,800 a month, 3 years in a row, that's over $100,000. Where, tell me, did all that money go?" They exchanged glances, and I saw Mom awkwardly look away. "We had expenses," she said, barely audible. "What expenses?" I asked quietly, but my voice was steely. Medical bills? Well, I paid those too. Mom hesitated, then whispered, Deborah, please. Dad added, looking at me with despair, we'll lose the house. And in that moment, I realized the conversation they'd had wasn't about the house, it was about me again, about my willingness to save them again, to bear the brunt of their mistakes once again, and yet, I stood silently, feeling that same old, familiar feeling welling up inside me, a mixture of guilt, weariness, and a quiet, bitter determination. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest, feeling the cold evening air slowly cool between us. Looking at them, so confused, so aged, yet still stubbornly unwilling to acknowledge the simple truth, you know what? I began calmly, though inside I was seething, even if you spent every penny I've sent you over the years, you still have a choice. Remember that little house outside the city I bought for you 6 years ago? I saw my parents' faces change in an instant, the corners of my mother's lips twitched as if she'd tasted something sour, and my father's gaze grew piercing. So what? My mother asked suspiciously, not daring to meet my eyes. Sell it, I said firmly, not raising my voice. This house is worth at least $80,000 now. That's more than enough to pay off the mortgage and not lose what's so important to you. My father immediately straightened up and, as if defending something sacred, stated firmly, we're not selling the country house. I smiled, albeit bitterly. Then I think you'll lose this one, I said, taking a step toward the door. Deborah, this is our retirement home, my father said quickly, his voice trembling with tension. We were planning to move there when we were older. Well, I replied, looking directly at him, if you lose this house, you might have to move there sooner than you planned. Mom sobbed softly and looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. You can't just let us lose our home, she said with a desperation that, as before, held no remorse, only the expectation that I would make everything right again. I'm not allowing you anything, I said, feeling a cold determination welling up inside me. You make a choice, you can keep the country house and lose this one, or sell that one and save this one, but I won't pay your bills anymore. But we're your parents, Mom said, as if that was the last thing that could stop me. I sighed, yes, and I helped you for years while you took it for granted, and what did I get in return? Accusations of selfishness. Well, that's it. I walked to the door, opened it, and gestured for them to leave. Please, go away, and don't come back here talking about money again. I walked inside, slammed the door, and turned the key in the lock. For a few minutes, I heard their voices outside, muffled, intermittent, as if they were arguing, but then the engine of their old Honda rumbled, and the sounds faded. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no guilt, only a heaviness, like fatigue, but with a hint of liberation. Several weeks passed, I lived my life as usual, but from time to time, news reached me, from acquaintances, through colleagues, and then from Lisa, my cousin, who, as always, couldn't keep her mouth shut. She called me on Saturday morning, her voice sounding somehow overly animated, as if she couldn't wait to tell me something important. Deborah, did you hear that? She asked without greeting. Your whole family has practically started living their lives anew. In what way? I asked, pouring myself a coffee. Well, Clara works 2 jobs now, she said with a strange triumph, in the evenings at her marketing firm, and on weekends at the coffee shop. She says it's tough, but she manages. She's a good girl, right? I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Very much so, I replied, a real adult life. And Jacob, Lisa continued, got a job at the warehouse and works double shifts. He says he's tired, but at least he pays for his truck himself. Excellent, I said calmly, that's what responsibility means. And, she added after a pause, waiting for my reaction, your parents are thinking about selling their country house. I didn't answer right away. I turned the cup in my hands, watching the coffee ripple across the surface. Smart move, I finally said. Lisa sighed, you're not worried at all, are you? None of this upsets you? I smiled, though it was more sad than happy. No, Lisa, it's not upsetting. They're just finally doing what they should have been doing all along, taking care of themselves. After her call, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the evening fall outside. Lisa's words echoed in my head, not because they hurt, but because they held a truth I could now see clearly. Clara was working 2 jobs, Jacob was learning to work, and my parents were preparing to sell their house to keep a roof over their heads. None of them were starving, none of them were homeless, it was just that for the first time in years, they were being held accountable for their own actions. I suddenly realized that all these years, by paying their bills, I hadn't been helping them, I had been holding them back from growing up, preventing them from taking responsibility for their own decisions. Every transfer, every paid bill, told them, "Don't worry, Deborah will pay." I had instilled in them a habit of irresponsibility, and only now, when I was no longer their safety net, did they begin to learn the simple truth most people learn in their youth: if you want something, you have to earn it. Life requires effort, choice, and priorities, and I knew they needed that lesson more than all my money combined. Clara was probably learning valuable skills standing behind the counter of that little coffee shop, where people shared stories, where the air smelled of vanilla and fresh bread, and where, perhaps for the first time in a long time, she understood that work isn't a punishment, but a path to self-worth. Jacob, as Lisa told me, showed remarkable determination to keep what he worked for, his truck, which had once seemed like a mere convenience to him but now became a symbol of independence, proof that he could take control of his life without my help. My parents, after long discussions and likely sleepless nights, finally decided to move into a place they could truly afford, without pretending their old life, with excesses and constant debt, was still within their grasp, and, strangely enough, I realized that by cutting them off from my support, I had perhaps done the kindest thing I could have done for them, given them the chance to become adults at their age, without shielding them from reality. Meanwhile, my business flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Without the constant drain of funds on other people's needs, I could finally breathe freely and focus not on other people's bills, but on developing what I had built with my own hands. I hired an assistant, a quiet but efficient student named Lauren, who helped with accounting, orders, and customer service. Thanks to her help, I freed up time to do what I loved: finding rare items, researching their provenance, and talking to collectors. My website began bringing in more and more orders, I expanded my online presence, and even began thinking about opening a second office where I could store some of my collections and host small exhibitions. The antiques business had its own rhythms. Fall was always a busy time. People rushed to decorate their homes for the holidays, looked for unusual gifts, and updated their interiors. I attended sales, appraised items, negotiated with sellers, compiled catalogs, and every morning, when I entered my studio, I felt that everything I had accomplished belonged to me and mine alone. Without regard for other people's expectations, it was gratifying to invest my energy not in saving other people's ships, but in building my own. One afternoon, as I was arranging vintage Christmas decorations in the window, delicate glass baubles with designs faded with age, tiny angel figurines, and candelabra with brass candlesticks, the phone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at the screen. Jacob. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't spoken since I refused to pay for his truck. "Hi, Deborah," came his voice on the other end, a little hesitant, but no longer as irritated as before. "I wanted to talk to you. I know things aren't right between us, but I want you to know I don't blame you for cutting us off." I froze for a second, then asked, "Really?" "Yes," he replied after a short pause. "At first, I was terribly hurt. I thought you'd just abandoned us, but now I realize, you were right. I was lazy, waiting for you to pay my truck bill while I wasted my money on nonsense." I couldn't help but smile. "How are you doing now?" "It's tough," he admitted, "but I'm managing. I got a weekend job delivering orders. And, I even make more money now than I did before. I just had to stop living as if your help was something permanent." "I'm glad you realized that," I said quietly, feeling a wave of warmth welling up deep within me. "Deborah," he added after a short pause, "I'm sorry I called you selfish. You weren't, quite the contrary, you helped us far more than you should have." After the conversation ended, I sat for a long time, holding the phone in my hands, listening to the old clock on the wall tick softly in the quiet of the store. I felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling: pride, not only for myself, for having managed to set boundaries, but also for him, for finally starting to grow up, for realizing that no one is obligated to save you if you're not ready to save yourself. Maybe, I thought, this whole storm, all these arguments, accusations, and coldness weren't the end, but the beginning of something new. Maybe my family would finally learn to stand on its own 2 feet, and I could focus on building my own life, not mending the cracks of others. Jacob's phone call was the first real conversation I'd had with anyone in my family since that anniversary disaster, and, strangely enough, it gave me not pain but hope, fragile as thin glass, but still real. A few weeks later, Lisa called. As always, her voice was excited. "Did you hear the news? My parents finally sold that country house. They got $85,000, enough to pay off the mortgage and even some left over, so now they're out of danger." I closed my eyes and let myself exhale. "That's good," I said, finally. "Claire is still working 2 jobs," she added, "but she seems to be doing pretty well, and by the way, she recently got a promotion at her main job. Now she earns even more than when you were helping her." I laughed softly, not out of anger, but out of relief. The world seemed to be slowly returning to normal, and maybe for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was exactly as it should be. "Yes, it was pretty bad," I replied, slowly leaning back in my chair and looking at her over my glasses. "I've been thinking about it a lot, especially since I started to really see things for what they are, without embellishment or the guilt that always held me back." Clara nodded, and a shadow of thought crossed her face, which, for the first time, seemed to me to reflect not childish remorse, but the realization of adult responsibility. "You know," she said quietly, "since I've been working 2 jobs, I began to understand how hard it must have been for you. I never even thought about how much money you spend on us." "More than $5,000 a month," I answered without a hint of reproach, simply stating a fact that had once been my daily reality. Clara's eyes widened, as if for the first time she heard a number that could change her perception. "Oh, my God, Deborah," she whispered, "I never thought about it that way. 5,000, that's a lot of money. I just knew you were helping, paying my rent, my parents, Jacob's, but if you add it all up, it turns out you could have bought yourself a house, gone on vacation, saved for retirement, or just lived comfortably." I nodded. "That's right, I could have, but back then, I thought I was doing the right thing, that family was the most important thing, and that helping you was my duty. Only later did I realize that by helping you beyond measure, I wasn't doing you any good, I was simply not allowing you to grow up." Clara looked down, blushed, and said quietly, "I'm ashamed that it took losing your support for me to realize how much I'd taken advantage of you." "I'm glad you realized it," I said softly. "The main thing is that you're now providing for yourself." She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Actually, it's kind of sweet. It's hard, of course. Sometimes I come home so tired that I just fall asleep in my clothes. But you know, there's something nice about that feeling. I finally feel grown up, independent, like I'm living my own life, not yours." I smiled. "This is what I always wanted for you." Clara looked up at me, and there was no longer any resentment in her eyes, only weariness and gratitude. "How are Mom and Dad?" I asked, flipping through the notebook where I was jotting down upcoming orders. "They're fine," she replied. "They sold the country house, just like you advised. Dad was terribly grumpy at first, saying he'd never forgive you, but Mom insisted it was better to sell and keep the main house than lose everything, and now, imagine, they're managing. Dad got a part-time job as a consultant at his old company, helping with projects, and Mom is an accountant for several small firms. She says she even likes feeling needed again." "You see," I said, smiling slightly, "they found a way. There's always a way if you're willing to look for it instead of complaining." "Yes," Clara nodded, looking at the glint of the glass globes in the display case. "I think this is the first time I've seen Mom and Dad so alive. They've stopped constantly arguing about who owes what to whom. They've even started spending more time together. They drink tea in the evenings and watch old movies. Mom recently baked a pie using your recipe and said it reminded her of when you were still home." We started talking, time flew by, and I caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time I enjoyed talking to my sister. She spoke enthusiastically about her work, how she'd been promoted, how she was now leading a project with a new team, how she was learning to budget, and even started saving for her first vacation, which she planned to spend with friends in the mountains. I listened and felt both pride and a slight sadness. The kind that comes when you realize that someone you've always protected has finally learned to protect themselves. "I have my own apartment now," she added proudly. "It's small, but cozy. I pay my own rent, I buy my own furniture, and honestly, every morning when I wake up, I feel like I live in a world that's truly mine. I looked at her and quietly said, "You have no idea how nice it makes me hear that, Clara." She smiled, and her eyes flashed with that rare, warm glimmer I remembered from childhood, when she, a little girl, would run to hug me because I brought her ice cream after school. We talked for over an hour, we discussed everything: family, business, the future. At one point, I caught myself thinking that this was perhaps the calmest conversation I'd had with Clara in years. No hard feelings, no demands, no complaints. Just two grown women who had finally learned to understand that love isn't always about saving, sometimes it's simply about letting others go their own way. As Clara was about to leave, throwing her long coat over her shoulders and stuffing her gloves in her pocket, she suddenly stopped at the door, as if remembering something, and turned to me with that expression you rarely see on someone used to defending themselves with words. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it held a genuine sincerity, not rehearsed, not forced out of a sense of duty, but the kind that comes from truly being willing to tell the truth. "Deborah," she said, biting her lips lightly, "I know we've messed things up terribly, and I don't expect you to simply forgive us and pretend it never happened, but I really hope that one day we can be sisters again, not just by blood, not because we have to, but because we want to, real sisters, who can talk to each other without fear or calculation, not those who only take, but those who know how to be there." I looked at her, and something trembled in my chest, not resentment, not anger, but a warm, cautious feeling, like the first thaw after a long winter. "I'd like that too, Clara," I replied quietly, "I really would." After the door closed behind her, I sat in my shop for a long time, surrounded by the scent of old wood, the rustling pages of antique books, and the flickering light of the fairy lights reflected in the glass globes in the display case. In that soft twilight, I felt that perhaps for the first time in years I could simply sit in silence and be content, not because everything was perfect, but because I'd finally stopped fighting what I couldn't change. My family, albeit slowly, albeit through hardship, had learned to take responsibility for their actions. My business, to which I devoted myself completely for so many years, had finally begun to bring in not only income but also that rare sense of inner peace that comes from living in harmony with yourself. The following week, I signed the lease for a second space, a spacious one, with high ceilings and large windows that let in a soft morning light, as if specially designed to highlight the antique furniture and porcelain. It was a move I'd dreamed of for years, but until recently I simply couldn't afford. Too much of it went to helping others, too little was left for myself. Now, holding the signed documents in my hands, I felt a strange, almost childish pride. I'd done it myself. As I left the lawyer's office, a cold winter wind hit my face, but even it felt fresh and invigorating. Then the phone rang, a familiar name appeared on the screen, Jacob. I froze for a second, not expecting him to call, but, feeling a little curious, I answered anyway. "Deborah, hi." His voice sounded surprisingly confident, even calm. "Clara told me you're opening a second store. That's absolutely amazing. I'm truly happy for you." "Thank you, Jacob," I said with a smile. "I'm a little delighted myself, though I must admit, I'm also nervous." "I wanted to ask you something," he said after a short pause. "Are you hiring anyone now?" "I'm thinking about changing careers. I've always been interested in antiques and restoration. Perhaps you could use some hands that know how to work." I was surprised, even laughing in surprise. "Would you like to work for me?" "If you hired me," he answered simply. "I know I haven't behaved well before, but I've learned a lot in the last few months. I've learned responsibility, the value of work and money, and I promise I won't expect any favors just because we're family. I just want to work honestly." I paused. Jacob always had a gifted hand. He could breathe life into even the most time-worn piece, and his attention to detail made him a valuable craftsman. "Let me think about it for a moment," I finally said. "I really need someone to help me restore the furniture for the new store." "I'd love that," he said with genuine enthusiasm, "and, Deborah, I don't want any discounts or special treatment, just treat me like any other employee." After the conversation ended, I sat in the car for a long time, watching the snowflakes slowly swirling in the streetlights. In that moment, I realized something truly important had happened. My family had finally stopped seeing me as a source of endless help, stopped expecting me to solve their problems. They had begun to treat me as an equal, as a woman with her own life, her own goals, and the right to happiness. I didn't know if I was ready to work closely with Jacob again. I didn't know if I could fully rebuild my relationship with my parents, but for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that one day, perhaps, everything would fall into place, and most importantly, I knew I could do it, that now I can set boundaries, stick to them, protect my dreams without sacrificing them for someone else's peace of mind. My phone vibrated again. It was a message from a new client, a man inquiring about a Victorian wire rack he'd seen on my website. I smiled, opened my laptop, and began replying. Christmas was coming, and this year it was supposed to be special, quiet, bright, and mine alone.